King Daemon the Good did much to mend the damage his father, Aegon the Unworthy, had done during his reign. But more than that, he'd finally completed Aegon the Conqueror's dream and united Westeros under one king for the first time, and also put down the first Blackfyre rebellion, started by his bastard half-brother, Daemon Blackfyre. In the years after, Daemon continued his work, that is until the Great Spring Sickness ravaged Westeros, taking the life of the king, as well as countless lords and small folk in the year 209 AC. That same terrible year of 209 AC was the year King Daemon II's second son, Prince Aerys, assumed the Iron Throne. Aerys himself had never imagined he would be king, being the second son, but his elder brother, the fierce warrior Prince Baelor Breakspear, was killed at the tourney of Ashford Meadow in a trial of 7 on behalf of a no-name hedge knight. With the death of Baelor and Baelor's 2 sons, Aerys suddenly found himself heir, with his father dying only months after Aerys became Prince of Dragonstone. In truth, Aerys never had time to prepare physically or mentally for his new role or the idea of being king, and in truth was singularly ill-suited to sit the Iron Throne. But to his credit, King Aerys I Targaryen was learned in his own way, though his interests were largely to do with dusty old tomes concerned with ancient prophecies and the higher mysteries, or certainly more scholarly than some of his predecessors. His areas of knowledge were not the sort to truly be of use in his newfound role as king. But it is said Aerys did try and adapt and learn. He was married to Eleanor Penrose, but in all those years of marriage, King Aerys had never shown any interest in getting her with child. Well-trodden rumours at court suggest that Aerys had even failed to consummate the marriage altogether. How true these rumours were, however, we cannot know for sure, as there has been some suggestion that these could have stemmed from Blackfyre sympathisers at court. However, given the actions of Aerys, most believed there was some fact to these tales. When Aerys was a mere second son, standing to inherit little, his lack of heirs of his own was a very minor issue. However, once he had become Prince of Dragonstone and then king, it became a much larger problem that needed to be addressed. Aerys needed heirs to ensure the stability of Westeros and the Iron Throne. As the history of Targaryen Westeros shows us, a succession crisis can quickly become a bloody affair. This was not going to be an easy battle for his small council, who were soon at their wits' end. They had hoped that Aerys simply had some form of dislike towards Eleanor that moved him to never share her bed, and thus they urged him to put her aside and to take another wife, one of his own choosing and to more of his liking, but the king would not hear of it. This in itself has led to countless amounts of speculation, as there was never any record of Aerys even having a mistress, or that he had any interest in women whatsoever. Thus the small council were left in a tricky position, as they were in truth there to serve at the king's pleasure, and the king's will was the king's will. Donning the crown during the Great Spring Sickness, there was no lavish coronation, given how infectious the sickness had become. But even so, from what we know of Aerys as a man, he would likely have had little desire or interest for the lavish ceremony of his predecessors. King Aerys I inherited a realm in turmoil from the first. While most of the major cities in Westeros were struggling with the sickness, save for those in the Vale and Dorne, as they made the sensible decision to close the mountain passes. But King's Landing in particular, as a trade hub, was hit hard. It is said that 4 in 10 succumbed to the sickness. A strong man could wake up healthy and full of energy in the morning, and be dead by the evening. So swiftly did this plague strike. No one was safe, rich or poor, young or old. The sickness struck down its victims with indifference, as well as killing King Daemon II and his 2 most immediate heirs, Prince Valar and Materys. The sickness also felled the High Septon of the Faith, and a third of the most devout stationed in King's Landing, among them almost all of the Silent Sisters. Thus the care of the dead the Silent Sisters provided was no longer possible. Bodies remained where they fell, rotting in the streets, piling up along the alleys of Flea Bottom, which in turn spread the sickness itself among numerous other horrible diseases. King's Landing had been hit with sicknesses of a similar like before, notably the sickness known as the Shivers during the reign of King Jaehaerys I Targaryen, but the death toll with this new sickness would eclipse the Shivers rapidly. In the end, bodies were moved to the Dragon Pit and piled 10 high and burned with wildfire, with the flames growing so hot and so large, a large amount of the city burned as well. But it was the only thing that could be done, and the bold decision credited to Brynden Rivers, Bloodraven, one of the great bastards, who played such a key role during the Battle of the Redgrass Field. But even when the sickness did relent, it would cause issues for King Aerys I Targaryen. Many of the hostages who were taken in the wake of the first Blackfyre rebellion were felled by the sickness, and this in turn would give the Blackfyre sympathizers confidence to start the process of rallying support for a second attempt at a rebellion once more. On top of this, Aerys also had many other pressing issues to manage. While the plague was certainly one of the huge problems King Aerys inherited when he took the throne, hardly had the plague begun to ebb and lessen did Daemon Greyjoy, Lord of the Iron Islands, send his ironborn ships reaving and pillaging up and down the shores of the Sunset Sea. Given the devastation in the realm, Daemon was free to raid and pillage as he pleased, and meanwhile, across the narrow sea, Aegor Rivers, Bittersteel, plotted with the surviving sons of Daemon Blackfyre. Perhaps it was because of these difficulties that King Aerys I turned to Brynden Rivers, the Bloodraven, to serve as his hand the king. King Aerys I Targaryen had unexpectedly inherited a realm under assault from three different key issues. The Great Spring Sickness had wreaked havoc up and down the Seven Kingdoms, King's Landing most of all. Daemon Greyjoy and his Ironborn had begun raiding and pillaging up and down the coast of the Sunset Sea without challenge, and murmurs of another attempted rebellion by House Blackfyre were growing in number. King Aerys, a man never expected to be king, and ill-prepared for the role, found himself in a dire situation with too much to focus on himself. But that is why kings have their counsellors, most of all the Hand of the King, the second most powerful man in the realm, with the ability to act in the king's name and with the king's voice. With many dying at court and still divisions on the Blackfyre rebellion, King Aerys had limited options, and while many did expect Prince Maekar to be named Hand, Aerys went a more unexpected route, but as history has proven to us, he perhaps did choose wisely, with the man he chose among the most infamous Hands of the King to take the position, one of the great bastards, Brynden Rivers, Bloodraven, who played such a key and vital role for the Loyalists during the Blackfyre Rebellion and had proven himself a capable politician, able to make challenging choices during the Great Spring Sickness. It was in fact Bloodraven's plan to burn the dead of King's Landing in the Dragon Pit, a difficult decision to make, but one that proved vital in stemming the spread of the sickness. But there are also those that speculate there was more to Bloodraven's appointment as Hand than his political skill and loyalty. It has also been put forward by some, more likely a cause for Bloodraven's rise to power was in fact King Aerys' interest in arcane lore and ancient history, matched by that of Bloodraven's, whose studies of the higher mysteries were an open secret at the time. Bloodraven had already risen to prominence at court, but few had expected that Aerys would consider naming him Hand. When he did, it kindled a quarrel between the king and his younger brother, Prince Maekar, who had expected the handship to come to him, like many others at court. Thereafter, Prince Maekar departed King's Landing for his seat at Summerhall for years to come. Despite the suggestion of many that Prince Maekar was the more suitable choice for Hand, Bloodraven did prove to be a capable hand to Aerys, but was also at the same time perhaps the best master of whisperers the realm had ever seen, rivaling the like of Lady Misery, the White Worm, who played such a key role during the Dance of the Dragons. Many rumours would be spread of Bloodraven over his time as Hand, owing to his interest in the arcane, and his unmatched ability to sniff out a secret or a hidden plot. There were those who thought he and his half-sister and lover, Shiera Seastar, used black sorcery to ferret out secrets, given how impossible the extent of his knowledge of them became. It is believed that Bloodraven, during this time, also proposed marriage to Shiera numerous times, but she always refused his offers, for reasons unknown, which has puzzled many, given their known love for each other. Among the small folk and lords alike, it became common to refer to Bloodraven's 1,000 eyes and one. So much fear did Bloodraven spark in men both high and low born, they would begin to even distrust their neighbours or closest kin for fear of them being a spy in Bloodraven's employment. Yet the truth of the matter is any king needs a good spy master, whose web of spiders is unknown even to him. And given the situation in the realm, Aerys had great need of spies, given the trouble that followed the Great Spring Sickness, in the form of houses Greyjoy and Blackfyre. But Brynden Rivers' skills also came with its downsides. As summer came, with it also came the worst drought that Westeros had seen for many decades, lasting more than 2 years. Many blame the king, but even the most uneducated of men knows the king has no real power over the rain. But given Bloodraven's position of power and the aura of darkness around him, Brynden Rivers became the target of countless accusations. Many cursed Bloodraven as a kinslayer, among others, but rather than let this damage his reputation or ability, Bloodraven embraced his dark reputation and used this element of fear to his own advantage. But this drought ended up causing many small folk to leave their lands in search of somewhere where the rain still fell. Brynden ordered them to return to their own lands, but few did obey. Many of them became robbers and rogues. Prices increased as trade dwindled, and it was widely held that travel was less safe under Aerys' reign than it had been under his father or even his grandfather. By the year 211 AC, Sir Otho Bracken, known as the Brute of Bracken, was expected to succeed to the lordship of Stonehenge. Not wanting to see such a man in power, the traditional Bracken rivals of House Blackwood were expected to start a war to root him out. It was suggested that Brynden, being half Blackwood himself, would not be inclined to hear any complaints of the members of House Bracken. Septon Stefan believed that Brynden would most likely do nothing, and if he did decide to act, it would only be to help his Blackwood kin to bring Otho to bay. It was that same year of 211 AC that Lord Daemon Greyjoy's raiding on the western coast of Westeros also came to a head, as the raids grew in the size of their targets. They included the likes of Fair Isle, and the shipping of the Arbor, and several villages in the Reach. By 212 AC, Lord Baron Stark had to call his banners to repulse the Iron Men from the Stony Shore, while House Lannister was building ships to strike the Iron Islands directly. While Bloodraven surely played a part in dealing with the Greyjoy uprising, he too surely kept his eye on Tyrosh, where his half-brother, Aegor Rivers, Bittersteel, remained with the surviving sons of Daemon Blackfyre in exile, something Bloodraven saw as a much more dangerous prospect than the Ironborn raids, as House Targaryen eventually managed to stop the raids with ease, with the assistance of House Stark and Lannister. History debates as to whether Brynden Rivers deserved his negative reputation, but one thing many do believe is he was a competent hand of the king, the best master of whisperers, and he played a vital role in the history of Westeros and the events that were to follow, shaping the final years of the Targaryen dynasty. King Aerys I Targaryen is often one of the most overlooked kings in the history of Westeros. Sandwiched in between some of the most influential Targaryen kings, his father, King Daemon II, is remembered thanks to the First Blackfyre Rebellion. Then of course you had the kings that followed Aerys, who required an extremely unlikely series of events to seat them upon the Iron Throne. Finally, we have his namesake, the last Targaryen king of Westeros, King Aerys II Targaryen, the Mad King. But despite being overlooked by many, the man himself has some aspects to his personality that do stand out, and some of these aspects of his personality could very well have facilitated the rise of one of the most influential men to ever hold power in Westeros, Brynden Rivers, Bloodraven. Aerys has been described by some sources as a spindly and stooped man with long straight Targaryen silver hair that framed his thin face, which bore a long thin moustache and accompanied with a long pointed beard. While we do not know the colour of his eyes, it is speculated that they could have been the purple eyes of old Valyria, like much of his Targaryen kin. He often wore his grandfather, Aegon IV's crown, but did sometimes wear others. In much of the art that has depicted him, his beard and moustache are prominently featured, and thus have become associated with him. King Aerys was a very scholarly man, and could have been made a maester in another life, much like the son of Jaehaerys the Conciliator, Prince Vaegon Targaryen. Aerys was well known as a bookish man who preferred reading to ruling, which in truth did not change when he suddenly found himself seated upon the Iron Throne. One tale claims that Aerys could be found reading all through the night in his chambers, with his only company a candle to read by. In a way, ruling the realm at first for Aerys was more than an afterthought, but this bookish nature also impacted other aspects of Aerys' rule, specifically his relationship with his wife and queen, Eleanor Penrose. There was a saying in the Seven Kingdoms that Aerys would sooner bring a book to bed rather than his wife, which in many respects seemed more likely than not. Aerys was said to have a particular interest in books about arcane prophecy and the higher mysteries, from the legends of Old Valyria to dusty ancient tomes of lost magic from the Age of Heroes. Some believed that in truth, Aerys became obsessed with the arcane and prophecy. At some point, Aerys read a prophecy that spoke about the return of dragons, which in turn began a chain reaction that would have far-reaching impacts, as Targaryen princes and kings to come after Aerys would too find interest in these old tomes and prophecies, the likes of Aegon the Unlikely and Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, men who would leave an undoubtable impact on the future of House Targaryen and Westeros. But there is also some that have speculated this interest in the arcane also had another consequence on the histories of Westeros, and through this shared interest and love of the higher mysteries, King Aerys bonded with Brynden Rivers, Bloodraven, who too had a love for the arcane. It has been put forward by some this could have influenced Bloodraven being elevated to the position of Hand of the King over Aerys' own brother, Prince Maekar. King Aerys' relationship with his queen has led to many questions in the years since his reign. He was married to his cousin, Lady Eleanor Penrose, but the truth is that even before he became king, Aerys never once showed any interest in getting his wife with child, or spending any time with Eleanor whatsoever, with the pair almost living two separate lives completely, even when Aerys became king and needed to secure heirs of his own. He instead shunned the bed of his wife, as he had always done. According to some rumours, Aerys did not even consummate the marriage. Now, it's not hard to imagine he simply misliked his wife, as many men and women throughout history have been forced to marry those they mislike. But there has never been any account of Aerys having a mistress, or any interest in any woman whatsoever, leading to the speculation that perhaps Aerys had desires elsewhere, or of another kind. If our sources can summarize King Aerys I Targaryen as a person in a single sentence, it would be the words of Septon Stefan, who told Ser Duncan the Tall the following during the dispute over the Chequy Water. His Grace cares more for old scrolls and dusty prophecies than for lords and law. He will not even bestir himself to sire an heir, which is his duty as king. Queen Eleanor prays daily at the great sept, beseeching the mother above to bless her with a child, yet she remains a maid. Aerys kept his own apartments, and it is said he would sooner have taken a book to bed than any woman. When you look at the long history of men who have served as Hand of the King since the very first Orys Baratheon, Brynden Rivers, known commonly as Bloodraven, over his term as Hand, proved to be both capable and effective at the role, and despite his critics, he can be accounted as among the best to take the position. While the realm had suffered through the Great Spring sickness, and then the droughts caused more suffering, with it the growing murmurs among the lords of Westeros for support at the Second Blackfyre Rebellion. And despite Bloodraven's sour reputation among the lords and small folk alike, his network of spies and knowledge of events up and down Westeros, from the Sands of Dawn to the Wall in the north, would be a key factor in how history played out. As the truth is, the Black Dragon was lingering across the Narrow Sea, in the Free Cities, waiting for the right moment to come and take its place, and bring blood and fire to Westeros once more. It was Lord Gormon Peake at the centre of the attempt to bring about a second, new uprising in support of House Blackfyre. For Gormon's and House Peake's role in the First Blackfyre Rebellion, House Peake had been stripped of two of their three castles the house had held for centuries, and began the swift decline of House Peake, from which they would never truly recover from. Gormon was believed to have been a close friend to Daemon II Blackfyre, and said to be a sour-mouthed man with a well-trimmed beard, coloured grey, black and white. An influential lord, even after the loss of so much of House Peake's power. Gormon was considered a great knight, and one of the best warriors of his age, and a key supporter to Daemon I Blackfyre. After he bent the knee and was punished for his role in the First Blackfyre Rebellion, it is said that Gormon became blind to reason in his thirst for revenge, in the recovery of his seats that were stripped from House Peake, as the droughts that plagued the realm ended, and the Great Spring sickness a fading memory. Lord Gormon, who had for years been talking in secret with the Black Dragons in Essos, managed to convince Daemon Blackfyre's eldest surviving son, Daemon the Younger, to cross the Narrow Sea and make a play for the Iron Throne. Feeling the damage and recovering realm made it the perfect time to strike, while there was still discontent towards Aerys and Bloodraven among the small folk and some of the lords. The man who would become Daemon II Blackfyre and be at the heart of this second Blackfyre rebellion was known as Daemon the Younger and was the third son of Daemon I Blackfyre. He would later go by the alias of John the Fiddler during the coming attempted uprising. Daemon was described as a young, lean man with a comely, clean-shaven face and fine features. He had the traditional silver hair of old Valyria, like his father and his Targaryen ancestors, among other Valyrian features. However, Daemon would dye his hair black to hide his identity, with his hair being the Targaryen silver, marking him out, drawing unwanted attention to him. Daemon was born in Westeros in the year 189 AC and was the third son of Daemon I Blackfyre and Rowena Tyrosh. He was named after his father and known as Daemon the Younger to differentiate between the two. As a child, Daemon became close friends with a boy called Alan Cockshaw. Alan was a member of House Cockshaw from the Reach and would in time become the lord and head of House Cockshaw during the reign of King Aerys I Targaryen. While history does not record Alan's exact age, we can assume he was close in age to Daemon, given the deep friendship formed in their youth. He was described as having a pudgy face with dark blonde hair. There was much speculation as to the exact nature of Alan and Daemon's relationship and how deep this friendship really went, with it being suggested they were in fact lovers rather than just friends, as Alan would become very jealous when Daemon paid attention to other men. When murmurs of Daemon returning to Westeros began, Alan was said to be ecstatic at the news. However, despite their supposed close relationship, according to Daemon, Alan grew tiresome when he became drunk. It is also believed that both Daemon and Alan were bullied by Daemon's elder twin brothers, Aegon and Aemon. In 196 AC, when Daemon was 7 years old, his father began the first Blackfyre rebellion. After the death of his father and older brothers at the Battle of the Red Grass Field, Daemon, with the rest of House Blackfyre, went into exile in Tyrosh with his surviving family and with his uncle, Aegor Rivers, known as Bittersteel. Daemon, being the blood of old Valyria, and like many of his Targaryen kin, was believed to have had prophetic dreams throughout his life, and it may have been these very same dreams that led him down the path to the second Blackfyre rebellion. It is said that Daemon had correctly dreamed that his elder twin brothers, Aegon and Aemon, would die at the Red Grass Field during the first Blackfyre rebellion, and later that Ser Duncan the Tall would become a knight of the Kingsguard, which, as we know from later events, did too come to pass, all in which gives some validity to the claims Daemon's dreams were in fact prophetic. But some still argue that these dreams could have been open to interpretation. Before the second Blackfyre rebellion, Daemon supposedly dreamed that a dragon would hatch from eggs at whitewalls, and thus plans were put in motion and conspiracies begun as the Black Dragon rose again. The second Blackfyre rebellion had come. The second Blackfyre rebellion took place in the year 212 AC. Daemon II Blackfyre had finally been convinced by Lord Gorman Peake, among other conspirators, to launch a second attempt to take the Iron Throne. While not an all-out bloody war on the scale of the first Blackfyre rebellion, the second is much more interesting from a political point of view, with much being behind closed doors, with scheming and planning that would all come to a head at the Whitewalls tourney. If events at the tourney had occurred differently, as they very well easily could have, then there is a possibility that Daemon II Blackfyre could have rallied enough support to take the Iron Throne for House Blackfyre. Across the narrow sea in Tyrosh, Daemon II Blackfyre, the eldest living son of Daemon I Blackfyre, is said to have dreamed that a dragon would be born at Whitewalls. Lord Gorman Peake, a Blackfyre supporter, somehow heard of Daemon's dream and convinced him to cross the narrow sea and make a play for the Iron Throne. The famous Whitewalls tourney was to celebrate the marriage of Lord Ambrose Butterwell to a daughter of Lord Frey. The tourney was used by some of those who had sided with House Blackfyre during the first Blackfyre rebellion, and those who felt resentment towards the rule of King Aerys I and his hand Brynden Rivers as a way to join their forces and plan in secret without suspicion. Most of the houses and lords who had fought for the Black Dragon in the original rebellion had their children taken as hostages. In many of these cases, those hostages had died during the Great Spring Sickness, which allowed for their families to plot once again. There were even some cases where the lord who had fought in the first rebellion had died in the years since, and the titles and lands had passed to a son who perhaps did not value the lives of their kin taken as hostages, or maybe saw this as the only way to gain their freedom. However, one important aspect to consider when talking about the Second Blackfyre Rebellion is that Aegor Rivers, the half-brother of Daemon the First Blackfyre, and one of the great bastards, who played such an important role in the first Blackfyre Rebellion, did not think much of Lord Peake's plan, and mistrusted Daemon's supposed dreams, thus did not give him his support, nor the sword Blackfyre, the sword of kings, the key organisers of the tourney, namely Sir Tormund Heddle and Lord Gorman Peake, convinced Lord Butterwell to name his prized possession, a dragon egg, given by King Aegon IV as a prize for the winner of the tourney. During the wedding tourney, Daemon was under the guise of a hedge knight, going by the name of Sir John the Fiddler. He was given a place of honour on the dais, uncommon for someone of his supposed position of hedge knight, which may have risen some suspicions. After the bedding had taken place, the history books tell us that Daemon, still under the guise of John, approached a fellow hedge knight, Ser Duncan The Tall, and told him about dreams he was having, involving Duncan wearing a white cloak in the future. In retrospect, yet another dream of Daemon's that would in time prove to be true, as Ser Duncan would later join the Kingsguard. It is also believed that Daemon tried to win Duncan over to his cause, but Duncan remained unsure. They were then interrupted by Lord Gorman Peake. Alan Cockshaw, a close friend of Daemon and speculated lover who had been ecstatic up until this point of Daemon's return to Westeros, deeply resented Duncan for the loss of Daemon's attention and became his secret enemy. Peake and Heddle attempted to rig the tourney so Daemon would win by bribing his opponents, who would be competing in his disguise as John the Fiddler. However, the plot was foiled by the intervention of Ser Duncan the Tall and the prowess of Sir Gledon Flowers, who had refused the bribe of Lord Peake. The dragon egg prize for the winner of the tourney had been stolen, and Sir Gledon was framed for the deed, due to his refusal to lose to Daemon in the lists. The missing egg was found to be in his possession, and he was arrested and thrown into a cell. However, Duncan slew Tormund in single combat, and revealed the egg had been found in Glendon's saddlebags, was in fact just painted stone. The real dragon egg was still missing. In truth, it is believed that Daemon himself had been unaware of the plot and the wider plan of Lord Peake and what it entailed, which left him unsure who to believe or trust. He opted for a different course altogether, and revealed his true identity as Daemon the Second Blackfyre, and ordered a trial by battle be given to Gledon, giving him a chance to defend himself, during which Gledon unhorsed Daemon on the first pass. However, by this time, news quickly spread throughout the castle and tourney that Lord Brynden Rivers, known as Bloodraven, the feared hand of the king, was marching on the castle with 3 members of the Kingsguard of Aerys I, his own personal guard of 300 Raven's Teeth and 500 knights and 5,000 infantrymen from the Crownlands and Riverlands, with more likely to follow. These men were drawn from House Darkland, Hayford, Massey, Rosby, Stokeworth, Mouton, and House Blackwood, the house of Brendan's mother, Melissa. Daemon called for those within the castle to fight to the death, but was laughed off by most of the fighting men. Seeing the gravity of the situation and the size of his uncle's host, Daemon then marched out of the castle and offered single combat. Daemon the Second Blackfyre, promptly taken prisoner by Bloodraven, thus ending the Second Blackfyre Rebellion before it truly even began, preventing bloodshed at whitewalls, in which many would have died, and stopping the risk of a Second Blackfyre Rebellion from turning into a long and drawn-out war that would engulf the whole of Westeros from the Wall to the Sands of Dawn. In the aftermath, Lord Ambrose Butterwell kept only 1/10 of his vast fortune, and the castle of Whitewalls was forfeit to the Iron Throne for his role in the conspiracy, with it later being razed to the ground as punishment. Sir Tormund Hedel had died at the hands of Ser Duncan The Tall, and Lord Gormon Peake was executed for his part in the rebellion, alongside many others who were too executed for their parts as well. Oddly, Aegor Rivers not being part of this second Blackfyre rebellion stands out as a key part of the history. Aegor, known as Bittersteel, did not take part in the rebellion, and as we know, refused to give Daemon Blackfyre, the Sword of Kings, something that many historians speculated did damage Daemon's attempt to take the crown. Daemon II Blackfyre was taken prisoner by Bloodraven and taken to King's Landing, where he would be held prisoner and hostage, to prevent any attempt by Aegor Rivers to crown Daemon's younger brother Haegon, as by the Blackfyre's own logic, Haegon could not be considered the rightful claimant to the throne while Daemon still lived, albeit a prisoner. But Daemon II Blackfyre died a few years later, between the years 212 and 219 AC, while a hostage in the Red Keep. Thus Haegon and Bittersteel were free to launch the third Blackfyre rebellion. While the first Blackfyre rebellion failed, it did come close to succeeding if the Battle of the Red Grass Field had gone the other way in the favour of the Black Dragons. In comparison, the second Blackfyre rebellion can be considered nothing but an unmitigated disaster, with the conspirators' plans crumbling to nothing before the rebellion could even begin in earnest. Perhaps Aegor Rivers, Bittersteel, was right to keep away from Daemon II Blackfyre and his attempt to take the Iron Throne, while many saw Bittersteel refusing to give Blackfyre, the Sword of Kings, to Daemon as a petty gesture. Maybe Aegor saw what others could not, that Daemon II Blackfyre was not the man to lead them. For a time, with Daemon in captivity in the Red Keep, many started to believe the Blackfyre issue was dealt with once and for all. But Daemon's death only a few years into his captivity left an open door for his remaining Blackfyre kin to relight the flame of rebellion once again. In 219 AC, Haegon Blackfyre, born between the years 190 and 193 AC, the fourth son of Daemon I Blackfyre. Given Haegon was so young at his father's death at the end of the first Blackfyre rebellion, meant he spent much of his life away from Westeros. We therefore know very little about his life and the kind of person he was, so it makes it hard to judge what kind of king Haegon could potentially have been. Late into the reign of King Aerys I Targaryen, it was clear to those far and wide that Aerys took very little interest in the ruling of his kingdom, or in fact being king at all. Thus, maybe this was the reason Bittersteel believed in 219 AC that it was the right time to launch the third Blackfyre rebellion. But unfortunately, despite the uninterested king, the task at hand was not going to be as smooth sailing as Bittersteel and Haegon may have hoped during their planning, as despite the king's disinterest, he was surrounded by those made for leadership, warriors skilled at war, and a hand of the king who saw and heard all. 1,000 eyes and one. Many would forgive Prince Maekar Targaryen for not swiftly jumping to his elder brother's defence after Bloodraven, Brynden Rivers, was chosen as hand of the king over himself. But Maekar Targaryen was not that kind of man, and the reality is Maekar, despite his dispute with Aerys over the handship, was always going to be one of the first to answer the call to his brother's defence, and that of House Targaryen. Maekar was first and foremost a warrior, and the kind of leader that House Targaryen needed at this time. Leadership that proved to be vital in crushing Haegon and Bittersteel's plans. Maekar's sons also fought in the war, playing key roles alongside their father. Most notably, it is said that Prince Aerion Targaryen, known as Aerion Brightflame, performed several well-known heroic acts that fueled the songs of singers and bards for decades to come. Highlighted in the histories is also the courage of Maekar's youngest son, the then 19-year-old Prince Aegon, the future King Aegon V. During the final battle of the war, the legendary and lifelong feud between Brynden Rivers, Bloodraven, and Aegor Rivers, Bittersteel, added yet another chapter, with a second duel between the two half-brothers, much like the one that occurred during the Battle of the Red Grass Field during the first Blackfyre Rebellion. Ultimately, Haegon I Blackfyre died in the aftermath of the battle, but not without some controversy that has stained the pages of history. When all was clearly lost for the Black Dragons, Haegon surrendered and gave up his sword, but he was dishonourably and treacherously killed. As for Aegor Rivers, he too was captured alive and returned to the Red Keep in chains, and there the Blackfyre issue could have perhaps ended once and for all, if not for King Aerys I. Many historians since have put forward that if Bittersteel had been put to the sword as all had expected, including the man himself, and urged by the likes of Prince Aerion and Bloodraven, then the puppet master who pulled the strings behind 2 of the 3 Blackfyre rebellions would never be able to orchestrate a 4th attempt, effectively ending any remaining Blackfyre ambitions for the time being. But that was not to be. Aegor Rivers, Bittersteel, was tried and found guilty of high treason, as all had expected, but to the shock of onlookers, King Aerys I, who never enjoyed having to make decisions himself, this time decided to spare his life rather than sending for the headsman, commanding that he be sent to the wall to live out his days as a man of the Night's Watch. Like many had feared at the time, this proved to be a foolish and misguided mercy, for the Blackfyres still had many friends at court and up and down Westeros, some of them only too willing to play the informer. The ship carrying Bittersteel and a dozen other captives who had joined the Black Dragons was taken in the narrow sea on the way to Eastwatch by the Sea at the Wall, and Aegor Rivers was freed and returned to the Golden Company in Essos. Before the year was out, he crowned Haegon's eldest son, King Daemon the Third Blackfyre in Tyrosh, and resumed his plotting against the king who had spared him. King Aerys I Targaryen sat the Iron Throne for the better part of 12 years before dying in 221 AC of natural causes in his late 40s. A handful of historians have speculated it may be possible Aerys' death of natural causes at such a young age could be seen as suspicious, but none have gone as far to suggest any foul play. In the course of his reign, Aerys had recognised a series of heirs, though none were children of his own body. Aerys died without issue, his marriage to Queen Eleanor still unconsummated. During his relatively short time seated on the Iron Throne, King Aerys I Targaryen had a surprisingly high number of heirs, especially during the later years of his reign. Of course, none of them were children of his own flesh, rather his brothers and nephews, while some did cling on to the hope that somehow the king would find his way into his wife's bed. The reality was the throne would have passed to Aerys' next eldest brother, even though House Blackfyre had been broken with the defeat during the Second and First Blackfyre rebellions. Members of the line of the Black Dragon still waited in Essos, and with Aegor Rivers, Bittersteel escaping his punishment after the Third Blackfyre rebellion, it only made the Blackfyre issue linger for longer. If House Blackfyre or Bittersteel smelled blood, or saw the Iron Throne as weak, then they could very well return once again, bringing blood and fire to the realm. But theoretically, this was not to be a concern for Aerys at the time, as despite the fact he had no children, he had plenty of brothers and nephews that all had claims to the throne. No succession crisis would occur. But the way of the world is an unknowable thing, and little did those living through the events know how perilous their position in fact was. King Aerys in total had 4 heirs during his 12 years seated upon the Iron Throne. His first heir, and perhaps longest serving, was his younger brother, Prince Rhaegal Targaryen, who was the 3rd son of King Daemon II Targaryen and Queen Maria Martell. Born around the year 173 to 178 AC, he was married to Lady Alyce Arryn, the 3rd such match between House Targaryen and House Arryn of the Vale. While the exact year of their marriage is lost to the pages of history, it is presumed to have occurred shortly prior or during the early rule of Aerys. Alyce would give Rhaegal 3 children, twins Aelor and Elora, and a second daughter, Dinora. We don't know much of Rhaegal as a person, however what we do know is that he was said to be a meek man, supposedly mad and sickly. It was also widely believed that Rhaegal was crazy, or insane to some degree, as he had been seen dancing through the Red Keep naked on several occasions. He became Prince of Dragonstone in 209 AC, when his older brother Aerys ascended to the Iron Throne. Rhaegal died in 215 AC, while choking on a lamprey pie in the middle of a feast. At his father's death, Prince Aelor Targaryen, Rhaegal and Alicent's eldest son, became heir to the Iron Throne and Prince of Dragonstone. Aelor and his twin sister Elora were born sometime between 195 and 211 AC, with the twins marrying each other like many of their Targaryen ancestors when they came of age. But Aelor was not to be Prince of Dragonstone for very long, as sadly in 217 AC, Elora accidentally caused the death of her promising young prince, her husband, her twin. The history books only describe it as a grotesque mishap. All other details have been lost. While the exact nature of this mishap is not known to us, it is though suggested it was sinister in nature and traumatic enough to leave Aelor's widow, Elora, apparently mad with grief. In the wake of her husband's death, Elora was named Aerys' heir, but to many it was clear she did not possess the mental fortitude to be an effective heir, let alone queen. But those worries were short-lived, as at some point after 217 AC, Elora died. From what is known to us, 3 men, known as the Rat, the Hawk and the Pig, attacked Elora at a masked ball. The animal masks the perfect disguise, with the men responsible never caught. The princess committed suicide soon afterwards. There is some argument as to if the attack at the ball was truly the reason for her suicide, or if it was in fact more related to the death of her husband and brother Aelor. Perhaps both could have been a factor, and likely was. But what we do know is once again Aerys was in need of a new heir. Third child of Prince Rhaegal, Daenora, was not named heir by Aerys after her sister took her own life. While we don't know the specific reason as to why, there is some suggestion that it seems to make sense and fit within the context of events that we know. Namely, it could have been the case that Daenora's age, with her being around 1 to 5 years old, could have been a factor. Plus the fact there was other, much stronger, more suitable candidates. Men who had proven themselves fine leaders and heroic warriors. Men with countless heirs of their own, preventing any further risk of a succession crisis. A firmer, more secure heir. Prince Maekar Targaryen, the 4th son of King Daemon II and Maria Martell, and the last brother King Aerys I, was named his heir. Maekar was a man in his late 40s when he was made Prince of Dragonstone, and by this time had been married for many years, a marriage that had given Maekar 6 children, 4 sons and 2 daughters, Daeron, Aerion, Aemon, Daela, Aegon and Rhae, meaning with Maekar, the future of House Targaryen looked more secure than it had for a long time. Maekar had also proven himself to be an excellent warrior and an even better leader, fighting with valor during the 1st and 3rd Blackfyre rebellions, playing a key role in each. He also even showed some political prowess in the wake of the 3rd Blackfyre rebellion. Even some of Maekar's children showed much promise, specifically Aerion and Aegon, showing courage and heroics of their own during the 3rd Blackfyre rebellion. And of course Aemon, wise and knowledgeable for a man of his age, being one of the few sons of House Targaryen to forge a maester's chain. Thus, it was so that when King Aerys Targaryen, first of his name, died in 221 AC of seemingly natural causes, Maekar Targaryen ascended the Iron Throne and a new era of Westeros had begun. But the events to follow in this new age would somehow turn out to be even more unlikely than the series of events that led to Maekar becoming king himself, and send Westeros and House Targaryen down a very different path than anyone could have foreseen.